Hey, welcome to the Sequential Artist Workshop Pro Calls. Every week we ask another creator, another graphic novelist to come sit down with us and tell us where they came from, what were the first things they made, what did they make recently, how did they do it, what are they thinking about now, how are they going to move forward, how do they keep going, all those things, career things, art things, feeling things, creative things. Every month it's a new creator, new challenges, new stories. Come check it out. Come sit down with us. You can sit down live for some of these calls by being a member of our groups. You can find us at learn.sawcomics.org. Come check it out. Come be a graphic novelist with us. Come join us on the socials. Sometimes it's Comics Workshop, sometimes it's Saw Comics. Either way, come check us out and welcome. Here we are welcoming Sacha Mardou again to talk about all of those kinds of things, but also about cartooning and art and all sorts of practices like that. So Sacha, I'm going to spotlight you if you're ready for that and let you dig in. And I just want to welcome everybody for being here and thanks for being part of the Saw community. And let's I don't know, I'm just really excited. Spotlight, here we go. Oh, I also have to make you co-host, so I'll do that on the side here.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much for inviting me back, Tom, and to everyone for showing up today. This is such a lovely community, and it really means a lot to be here again. So I've made a presentation about my career in comics. I'm going to share that now.
Awesome.
And it's called Connecting Stories, Comics as a Journey. So this is me in maybe 1981. I'm about 6 years old. And I'm a real Generation X kid. That's definitely the background I identify with. I'm from the north of England, near Manchester. And I grew up in a very difficult, fractured family. My parents would divorce around this age. And this was after a period of domestic violence and lots of infidelities on my father's behalf. And one thing I will say about my early years is that my mother taught me to read very early on. And this was a real source of solace. I could tune out of turbulent family times if I had a good book. And also being able to read was a good training for being an only child who would be left to my own devices very often. I could really handle my own company. So here's a little scene from my graphic memoir that just came out, and it talks about this era. So as Charles and Diana got married on our TV set, we were packing up our family home, and I ended up in this bedsit with my mother. It was very cold. There's the heater on, and then you can see me tuning out of this grim reality with a book. So church was not part of our early life, but it would become part of my teen years. So in the late 1980s, we got a knock on the door, and it was these two Jehovah's Witnesses. And this was the pamphlet they gave us. It was a little booklet. Look, I'm making all things new. And my mother grew very interested in the message of the Jehovah's Witnesses, and it would sort of spread throughout my family. So my stepdad at the time would study, and I would have my own Bible study. And it became like a very big part of my life. I've said before I was a voracious reader, and I'd read all the C.S. Lewis Narnia books. And I feel that reading The Last Battle by C.S. Lewis as a kid had kind of primed me for this message of the Bible that the Jehovah's Witnesses gave me. And so you can see that cover. It's Aslan is shutting down the world. He's bringing Narnia to an end in the final book. It's the end of the world for them, right? And this is what the Jehovah's Witnesses taught me was going to happen. And they taught me that, Matthew 24, it says, the sun will grow dark, the moon will no longer shine, the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers in space will be driven from their courses. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. This was such a powerful story to me, and like I said, the Christian allegory of Narnia had kind of prepared a spot in me for this to hit, and it did hit. And here's some images from Jehovah's Witness literature. You can see that's a very white Jesus and his white angels, all of God, and they are bringing the Great Tribulation, which is the start of the end of the world. And here's some Jehovah's Witnesses scurrying to safety. And here's the world after Armageddon has cleansed the earth of wickedness. And here's the faithful people, Jehovah's Witnesses, climbing out into a new world where they believe they're going to live. So this was powerful stuff, right, for a teenager. And as I said, I did believe it for a long time, but it was a very narrow, difficult path that the Jehovah's Witnesses were offering me. They don't believe in going to university. They famously say God is not going to need lawyers or doctors in the new world. He's going to need carpenters and plumbers to rebuild, right? And
Oh,
so I could feel the net closing around me, and I wanted to escape. And one thing I will say in terms of reading at this time, I was still a voracious reader, and I'd actually outread the children's library at my local library. And the librarian there was very strict, and she would stop me from checking out books from the adult section. So I basically abandoned the local library, and I would hit the local charity shops as my source of books, and I would buy whatever looked interesting to me. And so here's a book I found at this time, um, Jean-Paul Sartre's The Age of Reason, and I kind of wrote about it in my novel. It's really easy to read, and I was surprised. It's weird, not like a regular novel with a strong plot, but I really like it. It's about this man, Matthew, who wanders around Paris before the war. And, you know, The Age of Reason by Jean-Paul Sartre is kind of like the Seinfeld of existentialism. It's a book about nothing, you know, but it's about this man who is very concerned and preoccupied with his personal freedom. And, you know, I mentioned C.S. Lewis and how he kind of brought me into the Jehovah's Witnesses. And I think it was kind of Jean-Paul Sartre and George Orwell who led me out of it, because these were books that made me think, well, maybe my personal freedom is important too. So I did lurch away from the Jehovah's Witnesses around the age of 15. It took me a long time to leave, but I was quite determined. And the situation at home, it was incredibly difficult. My mother was obviously very indoctrinated, and for me to leave the Witnesses meant that I would not be in the new world with her. So it's devastating, right? And she says to me at one point, you know, tell me what's out there that's so great. And what she means by that is that the world belongs to Satan. And so why would I possibly want to live in it, you know? And all I can think of is Jean-Paul Sartre. It was like these authors had another way to live. My response was, I don't know. I can't help how I feel. I can't live a lie to make everybody happy. So by the time I was 17, I was completely out of the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I had some catching up to do in terms of being a cool teenager, you know, because I had definitely not been cool for the previous years as a Jehovah's Witness kid. And Manchester in the late 80s, early 90s, it was very much a culture of music, like the Smiths, the Happy Mondays, the Stone Roses. It was a culture of football. It was a culture of pubs and drinking, and a lot of drugs as well. A lot of the bands like the Happy Mondays would talk about drugs and drug taking. And what it was not, what Manchester was not in that time period, was a place of comics. I was not really exposed to many comics at that time. Like the Beano was the most famous comic at that time, and that's really not something that spoke to me. So entering this world of like youth culture, of music and drugs, honestly did not go well for me. In 1993, about a month before my 18th birthday, I tried taking LSD with some coworkers, and I stayed awake for the next week basically and did not come down off the drug, and I ended up being in a psychosis, and I was put into a psychiatric hospital for the summer. And so from May to October of 93, I was having a really bad time. You know, it's a very traumatic thing to have your freedom taken away from you and to be forcibly given medication and to just feel meaningless. And what got me through that situation, um, after I recovered and got out, was reading literature that kind of showed me that maybe this wasn't the worst thing in the world that could happen to a female writer, like someone who was going to be a writer. And I did feel like I wanted to write about this experience. So like in 1994, Prozac Nation came out, and I read that, and it was important to me. I discovered Sylvia Plath, The Bell Jar, Girl Interrupted by Susanna Kaysen. They're all stories of females dealing with mental illness and psychiatric treatment. And it made me feel less alone. And by this point, you know, I was in my early 20s, and I'd kind of missed a year of my life, you know, because I'd missed my exams that would have sent me to university. So I had to go back and repeat a year and then finally get to university. And I swapped the city of Manchester for this green rolling hills of South Wales. So I went to the University of Wales, Lampeter, which it's actually the third oldest university in the UK after Oxford and Cambridge. And it looks very grand, but it's actually very remote. And so it's, it's actually quite hard to physically get to. And so the university has a real problem with admissions. And so it was actually very easy to get in. But nonetheless, the English department was incredibly, rigorous and wonderful. And for me, for the next 3 years, which is how long an English undergraduate degree lasts, I would spend my time taking apart classic works of literature and really understanding like the plot and the structure and the character development. And, I would take these books apart and put them back together again in the nick of time so I could write a critical essay and hand it into my professor. I feel like it was the best training there is for a writer. And I will say one other thing about that is that my Jehovah's Witness childhood actually kind of came in useful. I think I was the only person in my class who read Paradise Lost and understood what was going on. It's basically the book of Genesis. It's the fall of Adam and Eve. Likewise, when it came to biblical imagery in poetic works, it's like I knew what was going on. I could recognize this as being from the Bible. So it was an advantage. And I did really well at university. I graduated in the top 3 of my class. And I went back to Manchester knowing that I wanted to be a writer. And I turned my attention to comics. I found the big 3 around the late 1990s. And for me, the big 3 are Peter Bagg, Julie Doucet, and Daniel Clowes. And I will also add to that, there's a cartoonist called Nick Abadzis, who is British, and he wrote a comic called Hugo Tate, which appeared in Deadline. And that was also really important to me. And so, I set about making comics. And for me, there was no disparity between high literature and comics because I thought about the novel. The novel was a new form of literature in the late 1700s, right? With Henry Fielding and Robinson Crusoe. Those books didn't exist before that. And so for me, comics seemed like the new frontier in literature, and I was going to make it my own. And so that's what I did. For the next 6 years, I made a lot of mini comics and I tried to make them look as close to like, Dan Clowes and Julie Doucet as I could. I would color photocopy the covers and have black and white interiors. And I would pretty much make a mini comic like every year, at least every year. And I would also do anthologies with friends. Here's what the interior of one of these comics looked like. Very much stories about people in their 20s figuring out how to manage like crappy jobs and their artistic aspirations with social life, falling in love, and just small acts of rebellion. So that's my work from this time, and this takes me to 2004 when I meet the American cartoonist Ted May. We start off as pen pals and get to meet in person, and we quickly fall in love. And so in 2005, I will actually move here to be with him. And so I live in St. Louis, Missouri now. We're still married. Okay, so from 2004, for the next 10 years, we're basically world building. We have a daughter in 2009, and I quit my job so I can be a stay-at-home mom for a few years. And I really put comics on the back burner. Like these pages you're seeing from my sketchbooks at the time, that's the only cartooning I did, was just recording her early years. But by the time she was 4 and started pre-K full-time, I knew it was time to really take comics seriously again. And I went back and started writing the story that I'd always wanted to tell, so my psychiatric story. And I remember listening to The Bell Jar, like rereading it as an audiobook around this time. And something about listening to it with my ears rather than seeing it on the page, it really made the structure of the book apparent to me. And I could see how Sylvia Plath had kind of split the narrative into the journey into the psychiatric hospital and then the psychiatric hospital scenes and the journey out of there. So that's what I wanted to do too. So I started to serialize these chapters as a mini comic, and here's a really early version of the mini comic, and then a more elaborate version of the mini comic. You can see this is a little photo collage cover I made of me standing outside a record store in Manchester. All these little record covers that I made and stuck in the window. And here, the middle scenes are scenes from doing like a dead end job. I was working in a burger bar when I was 17. So my intention was to just keep releasing this book as a mini comic, but in 2014, 2015, I got approached by a small press publisher who offered to put this into a square bound book. And so I kind of changed course. And what I did was I put what would have been the first 4 issues of the mini comic became a square bound book. So book 1 became the journey into a psychiatric hospital. And this book came out in 2015. And it was surprisingly well received. I had no expectations going into it. And what I found was that people responded. It got reviewed in a lot of places, everywhere from the AV Club to the Boston Globe and Mail to Publishers Weekly and the Comics Journal. And I think it sold okay. And it was a really great experience. Um, and around this time too, I was making long short stories, I would call them, for Mother magazine, which is Mutha. And my editor there was Meg Lemke, who now works for Publishers Weekly. And so I made stories about pregnancy and childbirth and the kind of difficulties I had and the natural highs I experienced. She really held my hand during that. And that was the first time I'd ever made work that felt quite so personal. Somehow making work about being pregnant and giving birth felt a lot more disclosive than just telling about the psychiatric hospital stuff, which I think I had recounted with maybe not feeling my way through it, if that makes sense. So this is 2015, and I'm 2015 going into 2016, and I knew that my next job really was to continue Sky and Stereo and finish it, but I took a tiny break. I had an idea for another book. And so I kind of followed the energy of this new story for a little while. And it was I was really discovering how much I loved long form and especially long form fiction. And so many things that I'd read had kind of come together to give me this idea of 2 lovers who kind of meet. It's about a guy in the 1980s who takes plant medicine and he's in a trance and he meets a girl in this trance and falls in love with her, kind of, but she's not real. And then 30 years later, he meets her in real life. And it turns out she kind of incarnated around the time that he met her in this astral plane. So it's kind of a crazy story, but I was influenced by real world things, including sort of ethnobotany. So the guy in the middle is Richard Evans Schultes. He's the father of ethnobotany. And he would take a lot of the plant medicines that he was, cataloging and discovering from indigenous people. I was also very influenced by Irina Tweedy, she was a Russian European woman who went to India and studied with a Sufi teacher and had all kinds of crazy experiences. I was very impressed by her book. This guy in the far corner, this cheeky chappy, is called Jeremy Narby. And in 1986, he was an anthropologist who studied in Peru with the Ashaninka tribe. And he took ayahuasca and talked about it back then, sort of decades before it would become well known and common knowledge in the United States. And then, of course, there's Sylvia Plath again and Ted Hughes, and also Asia Wevel, the very beautiful woman in the corner, who Ted Hughes would leave Sylvia Plath for this woman. And what was interesting to me was that both women would actually end their lives. So this idea of a very doomed love story. So I followed the train of this idea and I kind of figured out how to sort of make a graphic novel. And this is the technique I stumbled upon that I still use. So I very much start with the characters. And from those characters, I generate lots and lots of rough scenes. And when I have enough of these scenes to get me to where I want to go, I kind of stitch them together into a rough outline. And from that rough outline, I will handwrite a script and then I will type up that script. And then I will set about turning that script into thumbnails. And because I'm very concerned about the flow of the novel and if it really works, I went ahead and thumbnailed the whole book and I photocopied them down into pages and actually, collated them to make sure that I could read it as a book and actually read as a story and was satisfying. And I think it really worked. And here's the little spreadsheet that I made for myself, a little handwritten spreadsheet so that I could tick off when every page was penciled, inked, and added tones to it. Here's a thumbnail page, and here's some final art from that. This was a really, really fun story for me to make. These are 2 botanists in the 1960s. The guy is kind of based on Richard Evans Schultes and a lot of his experiences. The woman is based a little bit on Irina Tweedy and a little bit on Sylvia Plath. And I had really high hopes for this book. And so I reached out to a lot of literary agents. So Meg Lemke from Mother magazine gave me a list of agents to try. And so I tried to find agents and I completely failed. Like nobody wanted to take this on. It just seemed unmarketable. So I put these pages in a box and they are still in that box to this day. Um, and so this is 2016, right? And obviously Donald Trump won the election that year. And in my personal life, I'm not doing great once again. I'm feeling incredibly anxious. I'm having nightmares and kind of PTSD symptoms. And I end up in therapy, which for a British person who, you know, has a psychiatric history, it was not an easy thing for me to go to therapy. I was very mistrustful of the mental health industry. But I do go to therapy, and the fact that I am a cartoonist, I carry a sketchbook with me everywhere, and I also don't drive, and so I would use public transport. I would get the bus to and from and the Metrolink to and from my therapy sessions. So I'd have time after my sessions to kind of unpack on pages what I just, you know, uncovered in therapy. And what you're looking at now are images that I never thought I'd show anybody. Um, these are the sketchbooks that I kept them in. And just on a side note, I was really influenced by Julie Doucet, who in her New York diaries would make these really cool collaged covers for her sketchbooks. And so I did that too. I copied that from her. And so therapy turned out to be this wonderful experience for me. Here's a page from my graphic memoir, Past Tense, where I talk about it. I'm reading so many books on psychology and healing. This new information makes me feel like the ground is firming up beneath my feet. Understanding our emotions is key to life. So I was reading voraciously about psychology now, and it was also giving me an interesting perspective on the Jehovah's Witness childhood I thought I'd left behind, you know. So my mother, as I said, is still a Jehovah's Witness, and she believes that all the tragedy and horror in the world is because Satan is in charge of it. And having uncovered how trauma operates in us personally and how trauma operates in our society, I thought I'd found the real name of Satan. It's not this dark demon, but it's trauma. It's these terrible experiences and history that flows through us, you know. Oh, wrong way. Okay. And so we're getting on for like 2018 now. And I know it's time to finish Sky and Stereo too. So Volume 2 is finished and ready to go to press. And this is the full story of the psychiatric hospital. And I'm so proud of this book. Like it really captured what I was trying to do. And I kind of show the experiences of the hospital and the other inmates. And I'm still happy with it years later. It still kind of holds up to me. But unfortunately, the book there's a printing delay. It doesn't come out until the end of 2019, and it just kind of sinks. It doesn't get reviewed. People don't talk about it, or I don't go on podcasts. Nobody seems to read it, which is like a disappointment. But it's the way it can go in in the creative arts. And so one thing that the book has taught me for sure is that I'm really interested in making work about mental health and interior experiences. And, I've got all these notebooks full of therapy experiences. And I start thinking to myself, it would be kind of cool if I could share them. And I'm saying that from a place of feeling so much healed and so much better, right? And so here's one of the very earliest kind of therapy comics I made. I'm just going to read it to you. I was a woman unlocking a basement door. I was a woman awakening with dread from a dream of committing an unspeakable act. I never spoke up. You don't know the right words to describe any of it. I am a woman finding a chest freezer in the basement. It's a sauna in here, the girls tell me. I let the girls out one by one after the dream is done. I'm the woman asking them the questions no one asked. Chest freezer sauna no more. So, this is a very experimental comic, and it's not quite there. I can see what I'm getting at. I'm getting at dreams and therapy and healing, but I realized that I need to be more specific than this if this is going to work for me. And so I go to therapy and I talk to my therapist about it. So by mid 2019, I'm 2 years into therapy, which means I have 2 years worth of sketchbooks covering my sessions. And if I'm being honest, a part of me longs to make comics about this therapy stuff. But how can I? Therapy isn't just about me, is it? It's all my messy family history too. My dad went to prison, my mum went to church, and me, I was put in a place where they take broken teenage girls. So soon I share this little therapy comic on Instagram, but there's a problem. Oh no, what? This post and others like it garner way more attention than my usual comics, and it freaks me out. So I talked to my therapist about it. At first, I figured that people are just nosy, but it turns out they can actually relate. Yes, of course they can. And my therapist talked to me about this, helping me identify what was the block, what was stopping me from sharing this more personal work. And we made connections. So part of it was needing to figure out what was personal, what could be shared, and what was private just for me. And also the places in which I needed permission. If this was going to involve the stories of other people and my family story, I needed to check in with the people that this would involve. And so I kind of wrote emails and had conversations in person with people like my mother and my half sister Charlie, who, you know, she's from my dad's side of the family and grew up not knowing a lot of the family history, but had recently found it out, and it had been very devastating for her. So this is the conclusion I reach. I once read a piece of writing that said, when you write a story, pretend you're telling it to just one person. So my half sister Charlie is my just one person. I will start writing personal stories that are invisibly addressed to her. And a lot of the book I would go on to write would actually be, in my mind, me telling her what happened in our family and trying to explain it to her. And so from this springing off point, I made a lot of work. I made a lot of therapy comics, and I just put them online, one after the other, week by week, sometimes two a week. And it garnered attention. So Bored Panda shared my comics, and that drove a lot of eyes to my social media. And then Huffington Post piggybacked off that, and they also did a little piece about my comics. And Richard Schwartz, the founder of Internal Family Systems, he saw my comics online and reached out to me, and I had a Zoom meeting with him, and that was kind of incredible. And I also made a comic about that. And best of all, I mean, the comics were connecting with people online in real time. I was getting instant feedback with every comic. There's one guy who says, you know, he had ADHD and he's not been able to learn, you know, the IFS stuff through normal channels, but because of my comics, he got it and he was able to make that connection, and it really helped him. So receiving feedback like this was incredible, and I'd never encountered it before. This was new territory for me, right? And also the numbers, I was reaching thousands of people rather than just dozens of people. So I knew that I was onto something. And around this time, I also stumbled across the work of Seth Godin, who is a marketing man, who comes at it from a very heartfelt, personal place. And he talks about work that matters for people who care is the shortest, most direct route to making a difference. Um, Seth Godin, in his books and in his videos, would talk about how there is no longer a mainstream. You know, people aren't just watching the same 4 TV channels and connecting like that. People are on the internet, and the internet is a collection of hundreds of thousands of special interest groups. So what's your special interest group, and how can you make work for the people who are in that group with you, and do it from a place of generosity? So that was my MO. We're getting on to 2020 now, right? And the library system that I worked for, it closed for a while and then reopened to absolute chaos. And our CEO was not treating people very well. And it was causing a real moment of reckoning for me. And so I decided to quit therapy. I decided to quit my job. We had enough money for me to not work for a little while. And I really decided to make a go of therapy comics. And so I reached out to one of the literary agents who'd rejected me back in 2018 with Strange Kind of Love. And I said, you know, I have this idea for a therapy memoir. What do you think? Her name's Anjali Singh, and she's a really amazing agent. And she said, yes, I'm totally into therapy. Let's work on this together. So she had me create a book proposal. If you don't know this, I didn't know this going into it, but when you try and sell a nonfiction book to a publishing house, they don't want the finished book. They want the plan for the book, because the editor who takes it on is going to work very closely with you to find the story. And so we made this book proposal, and obviously I did kind of need to know what the book was going to be about. So I did kind of have to write it in a way, because I was going to have to try and sell it. So I really had to identify, well, what is a graphic memoir? I've never written a full-length one before. So this is what I found out. It needs to read like a novel with setups and payoffs. And I could do that, right? Because I've done 2 graphic novels. I know how to write scenes and hit those beats. So I'm like, yes, that's good. I can do that. Include only scenes that apply to this story. It's not a complete autobio. It's the story of one experience in my life. And for me, that was identifying and healing my childhood trauma. Okay, so I've identified what the spine of the book is going to be. And number three, I need to be healed already. I need to be over that hill. And, you know, this is, by this point, it's 2020. I'm really comfortable talking about therapy. So, yes, I am over that hill. And finally, don't throw people under the bus and don't get sued if possible. I need to find a way to, you know, bring people on board that I'm going to include in this book, which I do. And also the people that I don't want to reach out to, for example, my father, who I'm estranged from. You know, I don't want any contact with him. So it was a question of disguising him, changing locations and names. So, you know, I can't get people in trouble. And this reminder from Twyla Tharp, the best you can do is remind yourself that you're a good person with good intentions. You're trying to create unity, not discord. That would really be my guiding light. I would keep coming back to that quote. Okay, so here's what the book proposal looked like. It took 8 months to write. It included a 20-page chapter from the book, which I did two versions of. I did a black and white version and a color version. And the idea for that was that a full color book is a very expensive prospect for a publisher. So if we had a black and white option up our sleeve, it would widen our net. The book went out on submission at the end of October 2021. And by mid-November 2021, we had a very firm, very nice book offer. And we had other interest as well, but the offer that we went with, so her name is Lucia Watson from Avery. And if you've read the book Ellen Forney's Marbles, it was the same editor from that book. So here is a person who is very comfortable with the graphic memoir format. And she's also very comfortable with, you know, narratives of mental health. So she felt like the perfect person. I was so confident going into this contract with her. And we had 18 months to do the book, which is a crazy, crazy turnaround. And for the first year of that, it was just hashing out the story and getting to this middle image you see here. So the very first one is my toilet paper draft. That was just for me to see. And then I refined it a bit and would show it to my editor, and the story would get, you know, we would go back and forth on the story in this kind of thumbnailed format. And then that's the final art done in watercolor on 9x12 paper. I had to work kind of small when I did the final art because I didn't have much time, so I couldn't go bigger. I couldn't use a dip pen because that's too laborious and messy. I had to use like a Copic pen. So I had to take shortcuts to do this on time. Here's some more images from the interior of the book. And here's what my schedule looked like for the 6 months that I did the final art. So you can see I made another little hand-drawn spreadsheet for myself. I had to basically take the 6 months I had and reverse engineer how many pages I had to do over that time. And so what would that look like on a day by day? And I did give myself weekends off, so I wasn't completely burned out. However, I would, you know, at the end of every day, having met my page count, my hand would throb and my eyes were sore. So it was a real physical slog finishing this book, but I got it handed in on time. And then it went to Avery, to their production team, who put in the lettering, and they just made the pages shine, you know. So here's some final pages. And this is where we're at now. The book is finished. It came out last week. We got a quote from Richard Schwartz, the IFS founder, who's something of a hero now. Beautiful words that he gave me for my book. But what you'll notice is that I handed that book in July 2023, and the book didn't come out until last week. So over a year for this book to come out. And the fact is that when you work with one of the big 5 publishers, you know, it moves very slowly. And so that gives you a lot of time in between, you know, things that you have to do, which gave me time to write another graphic novel. So this is something I've not even shown to my agent yet, but I've talked to her about it, but she hasn't seen it yet. And so I've written a young adult graphic novel. It's about 220 pages, and it's about 3 teenagers who navigate life in a high control religion called the New World Society that just coincidentally very much adheres to what the Jehovah's Witnesses teach. So here's one of their pamphlets. Here's a kid whose mom is thinking of converting. Here's another kid who's called Darius, and his older brother has been shunned. I don't know if you know this, but when you leave the Jehovah's Witnesses or get disfellowshipped, people are not allowed to talk to you anymore from within the religion. So it's incredibly difficult for people. And so that's going to be the next project for me. And also taking this strange kind of love book out of the box and seeing if I can rework it and maybe convince my agent that this is a good prospect after all. So we will see. Watch this space. Um, I'm going to wrap up very soon. I just wanted to show you some resources which have been invaluable to me on my writing journey. The first one is Dorothea Brand's Becoming a Writer. This is a really old book from the 1940s, I believe, but she talks about the unconscious and how to harness the unconscious and pull that into your stories. It's such a cool book. Like, you know, it's kind of like a hidden gem that I think everyone should seek out. There's Twyla Tharp's The Creative Habit, about how to set up a good creative practice so that you go to your desk and do your work every day. And on that theme, The War of Art is about if you struggle sitting at your desk and doing your work, if you struggle with resistance, that's the book for you. Diana Wynne Jones's Reflections on the Magic of Writing, it really talks about how her childhood informed her as a storyteller and made her a storyteller. It's just a magical book. The Practice by Seth Godin is about creating a sustainable creative practice as well as shipping your work and selling it to the world, giving it to the world. And also his video, Your Job is to Make Art. I recommend that everybody go watch that. And if that's helpful, I can send that along to you, Tom, to share with your students. And then the final one is Robert McKee's Story, which is actually a book for screenwriters. But it really focuses on how to write a scene. And for me as a graphic novelist, writing strong scenes where the plot is pushed forward and that the scenes really do their job. I got a lot from Robert McKee. That's a kind of fundamental resource for me. And so before I wrap up completely, I would just like to try and tie my themes together. And I've written a very short comic for you, which I'm going to read aloud. And this is me talking to myself, which is what I do a lot. Okay, so when I try and connect the dots between my life and the stories I've written and drawn, I'm conscious of how this has involved the support of other people. I think about my mum teaching me to read at an early age. She herself loved to read and wanted that for me too. She wanted me to excel in school, but I also know that she needed me to be independent. With a working single mother and no siblings, I needed to be able to occupy my time and tolerate solitude. That was my reality. My mum and most of her sisters were nurses, hardworking, practical women, but one aunt was very artistic. She taught me to draw, she gave me art supplies, took me to art galleries, and her influence was so important. In high school, I'd receive encouragement from teachers. My English, art, and drama teachers all gave me support. It would be my high school teachers who'd encourage me to go to university. This is my English teacher who I'm still Facebook friends with. You have the grades to get into university, Sacha. It should be your goal. And I needed that encouragement so badly because things were rough at home. Religion had taken over. There's no value in a worldly education. Armageddon is so close. And when I was your age, I was supporting myself financially. I wasn't a drain on the family, but I wouldn't be put off. I studied English literature in college, and I knew I wanted to be a writer too, but only after graduation would I make the connection that I wanted to make comics. Yes, this is my calling. The idea was not taken seriously by my mum or my stepdad. What are you going to do now you've graduated? I'm going to be a cartoonist. And what are you going to be in the real world? I'll show you, I thought. And I recall my mum chiming in. Now you've got a degree, you can be a teacher. To my mum's mind, it was a step up from nursing. But instead, over the next 2 decades, I'd support myself by mostly working in libraries and making comics around my work schedule. And I found support along the way from my partner, my family, friends, other cartoonists, and readers. And in the last 2 years, I've added to that a literary agent, and for now at least, an editor and a publishing team. This has been the best time in my career. But in terms of financial support, things are less certain. After 2025, I don't know how much income I'll make, and I don't have a 401k. I can't retire. Okay, so having connected the dots between my creative life, what is the lesson I'm going to take from it? Well, I can see that I've needed a lot of help and support from others, and I see that the need for support is ongoing. My work requires a network, not just my solo determination to make it. But I'm also noticing that this goes beyond my need for a career. Even in my early years, literature and the arts gave me solace and nourishment. And in my teen years, when my family joined a strict religion and I was given a very dark vision of life, I'd read widely enough to be able to think for myself. I could see that the world was messed up, but I could still see that there was beauty and goodness in us too. My mum's religion didn't have the full story. My connection to literature and my own creativity gave me that self-connection. It supported me even when life was hard or disappointing, and I'm so grateful to it. So the connection I find through stories, it goes in many directions. And here's some words from Stephen King to finish with that I can't really top. In the end, it's about enriching the lives of those who will read your work and enriching your own life as well. It's about getting up, getting well, and getting over. Getting happy, okay? Getting happy. And I agree with those words to live by. So thank you very much. That concludes
Hey,
my talk. I'm going to stop sharing,
amazing.
find how to do that.
And don't forget,
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm trying to stop sharing, Tom, and it's giving me a bit of trouble.
might be able to do it. Here we go. Easy, easy peasy.
I can't see myself there. Let's
Oh
see.
yeah, maybe.
Oh, hang on. Okay, here I am. Hi.
Awesome, great, thanks. Um, thanks, Sasha. Wow, wow. That um, there's 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 so much there. I don't know. Oh, anyway, I could go on. I had this idea in my head. There's this the Jewish ritual of Passover where they say it would have been enough if only, but you didn't have to keep giving and giving and giving. They're talking to God. And I felt that way about this presentation. It was like, it was so much, and you didn't have to show us all this process, and then you didn't have to show us this and all this stuff, and you just kept giving. So there's so much in there that was very, very inspiring, is sort
Thank
of
you.
trying to say. And I'm also hoping to remind people of some of the earlier parts of the talk. So if you've got questions, please let's take them, and let's engage with Sasha for the few minutes we have. Um, and you don't have to ask in the chat. You can raise your Zoom hand, and then we'll and then
Sure,
come
yeah.
on screen. I know somebody's got some, and also I know some people were so inspired, particularly Friday night. You came and talked a lot more about IFS and about the therapy system. And I think we can probably take some questions about that if people have.
Sure, yeah.
So people are just kind of randomly throwing some in the chat. I'll randomly ask them as I see them. Do you watercolor background before adding words and drawing over? Elizabeth asks.
No, I don't. I know Sarah Glidden does that, and I kind of
Mm,
really studied how she approaches comics, but I really liked the whiteness of the pages behind the work, and so I tended to kind of keep the color pretty concentrated and not do too much in the way of, priming the paper. I just wanted that kind of white glow through. One of my reasonings was that the story is so dark that the fact that the publisher had agreed to a full color book, it was my opportunity to sort of give some contrast. So I show the vibrancy of life in the world and in my clothes and my handbags that I take to therapy. I just wanted to be colorful and vibrant. And so yeah, I didn't really underpaint. I just went on the page.
And I think you said you worked in markers, right? Because you were working quickly.
No, I worked in watercolor. I used Copic pen
Oh,
rather than a dip pen. So I think I used a dip pen for Sky and Stereo, but it's just I have to go too slowly with the dip pen. I really need to like hammer these
okay.
pages out. So I use like a Copic, like a technical pen to do the art, which is not my preferred thing, but
I,
it was necessity. Yeah.
and I have a quick question, then we'll take Gina's question. She's raising her hand. And that's why was the turnaround from your publisher so quick? Why did they say we need it? Because it's not a timely book, right? It's not about.
Well, they kind of felt it was timely. I mean, it was
Uh-huh.
right after the pandemic, and mental health has been talked a lot about in the media. And internal family systems as a therapy model is getting very well known. There've been a couple of high-profile books that have talked about it, including Jonathan Van Ness from Queer Eye. He
Right.
kind of talks about internal family systems. Glennon Doyle, who has a very popular website, and she's an author, she was doing IFS therapy. So they really felt like they didn't want this to be like a 3 years in the future book. They wanted to run with it as fast as they could. And also they have their own schedule of what they're putting out into the world, and that's where it fit. And so it was difficult, but it's also kind of nice that, I didn't I didn't have to spend the next 3 years of my life drawing this in a way. So it worked. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, Gina, do you want to come on and ask?
Hi, Sasha. Thank you. This was like a really great talk. Um, I I'm wondering if you could talk a little more about just the emotional process of working on comics that are really personal like this, and sticking with it for so long, and like, I don't know, I guess things that helped you get through that.
So there was definitely a turning point for me with Sky and Stereo. It was very personal stuff I was talking about. But I think the way I approached it, this is pre-therapy, I actually recounted the story whilst keeping the emotions of it like a little bit at arm's length. And I think it feels very different in tone to past tense, which was written where I'm willing to feel all the feelings now because they don't terrify me anymore. So therapy was that turning point. And I don't think I can ever write a book like Sky and Stereo again, where I keep the feelings at arm's length. I feel like I have to feel my way through it. So to give an example, I've just written a young adult book about the Jehovah's Witnesses, right? And it's three young characters, three 15-year-olds. Like I have a 15-year-old daughter right now. And so I have a window into what being 15 is like. And I remember very clearly what it was like for me. But these kids are not me, they're their own characters. And the only way I could connect with them was to really kind of feel my way through their experiences. And so therapy is that turning point where I'm comfortable getting uncomfortable and I can pull that into my work now. Does that answer your question? Does that make sense? I'm happy to elaborate if not.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to second that and say that, like, in the long list of things where I said, just how generous your presentation, that was one of the points I wanted to point out, was that you talked about, you didn't use that word comfortable with feeling uncomfortable, but you talked about feeling your way through it and how you weren't ready at certain points to do that. And then when you were ready to, quote, feel your way through it, you did it. And that's a great topic that doesn't get talked about very much,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up, and I love
It's
that.
interesting how, I mean, especially with therapy, things can show up at a certain point in your life. I remember watching that Finding Neverland documentary with Michael Jackson's abusers, and
Mm,
I watched that while I was in therapy, actually, that came out during that period. And I remember the two young men saying that what made them kind of wake up and talk about the trauma they'd been through with Michael Jackson was the fact that they had sons who had just turned that age, and they could see themselves in their sons and realized that what had happened to them at that age was in no way okay. And that's
mm.
what made them speak out. And that it was my daughter turning 6, which was when I kind of started to like fall apart as well. And so it really is, your children are kind of like a mirror for your own emotional life. And I mean, a big part of the book, Past Tense, is about healing this stuff so that I can give my daughter the story of our family without the charged, difficult, repressed emotions that used to live with that. That used to feel a very explosive story to me. And now it feels like something that I'm on the other side of and that have made peace with and continue to make peace with.
Wow, that's really great. I can't wait to watch this recording because there's so much happening here, Sacha. Thank you. We have definitely a couple more questions. Randy's got one, and then I want to go to Barry, and then I want to ask one for Alice. Randy, do you want to go ahead and ask?
Sure. This was so fabulous and loved your presentation on Friday too. Just got the book. But I'm curious, I love that you showed us the rough draft part of your process. And it looks like you do it by hand first. And then, so I'm curious, you said you use 9x12 watercolor paper. Is that like a a hot press or?
It's the green fluid paper. Yeah, I think it's hot press. It's very smooth and it kind of feels like Bristol, but it's very absorbent like watercolor paper. And so, yeah, I tape that down to my table and I work directly on it.
And so you literally do this by hand and then you scan it all in, or do you give your publisher a box of your papers like you showed us?
Oh, no, I wish. No, we scanned it all in. And my husband's Ted Mays, he's very good at digitally editing work. And so he helped me, do all the levels and clean the pages
Oh,
up. So we sent them like a very clean digital version, but it didn't have any of the lettering in it. And I basically sent them like a hand lettered guide where they kind of put all the lettering in for me. So that saved me a lot of time. And I could have done it myself, but I would have needed like another 5 months. And so they're like, no, we have a team of like 3 people who can do that for you. So yeah,
oh,
I was well
wow.
supported by the publisher for this book. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Well, thanks for the little insight into your process too.
Oh,
It's
yeah, my
fabulous.
pleasure. Yeah.
Awesome. I don't know if Barry wants to ask the question he had. Barry, if you,
Yeah, I don't
you
know how good my sound is, but
hear
I
I
you.
can hear you. Hi,
I
Barry.
was thinking about your oh good, thanks. So I was thinking about your therapy comics, and I was like the other day I was like just making a little comic on some scrap paper that I thought I wanted to share about, you know, stuff, and then it kind of got away from me, and I was talking about how I was jealous of all the dads in Scouts because they're much more like kind and upstanding and all that kind of stuff than I am. And I was like, do I really want them to know that I think of them that way? I don't know. And then I was like, can I even share this comic? I think I'm just gonna scrap it.
Mm. That speaks to how, I made these comics for myself before I started sharing them with the world. So from 2017 to 2019, I was making comics about my therapy. I mean, based on what was happening in sessions. But I would do process work in between. I would listen to, therapy, IFS therapy meditations, and I would sit and bring up, like write down and make comics about the feelings I was experiencing. But I didn't intend to show them to anyone. And so that privacy for 2 years to make this work in secret was a vital part of that process to me.
Mm.
I don't think I could have been that vulnerable to begin with. Like vulnerability, I feel like is a muscle that you learn to flex. And now I'm pretty comfortable being vulnerable. I mean, it's still not easy at times. I can share things and I'm like, oh, this feels really risky. But so far the
So
sky has
do you
not
mind if I
fallen.
ask a follow-up question?
You
Was
go
it
for it.
sort
Yeah,
of
yeah.
like the time between having written it and putting it out for other people to see kind of allowed you to, did you process it, or was it just that it didn't have an impact on you anymore because of the time?
Well, like two things are happening. So for a start, I mean, the trauma that I was healing in therapy was making me feel very unburdened and lighter. And then this creativity aspect of it, like the fact that I wanted to include this in my work, was a kind of testament to how far I'd come. I couldn't have done this unless I had healed and was feeling better. Um, so I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and again, I'm definitely going to watch this replay. Lori asks, was there ever a point in therapy that it made you feel worse and you stopped going?
Oh God, yeah. Yeah, for sure. It gets worse before it gets better. And that's what I'm saying. I wasn't making comics from the messy middle. I was making comics from the other side of that hill. I remember in the middle of therapy, I had a dream that I was like on a beach and I was like digging up like toxic waste. I was finding these black lumps of toxic waste. And I was like, oh my God, well, it's a good job I found this, right? Because it could have poisoned the entire beach. But then I kept digging and digging and digging and finding more and more. And it was definitely a case that in the middle of therapy, a part of me was like, why did I even open this box? Because it just feels relentless and unending. And it was really, really difficult. And it's good to remind myself of that because, I'm not struggling with anxiety like I once was. And a lot of the family secrets and a lot of the family trauma that was buried and felt like unspeakable that I could never talk about publicly. I've kind of gotten well enough that I can talk about that and it operates in a different way in my nervous system now. I'm not constantly triggered all the time.
Mm.
So yeah, I truly respect the messy middle of comics. And I feel that that is a time when, I talk about privacy and personal. And so the private aspect of the work it was like healing and life-saving. I couldn't have done this work publicly. I mean, there would have, that wouldn't have been appropriate. But it was only after that healing had happened that I could delineate, what I still wanted to keep private. And that tends to include stuff about my husband and my kid, right? That's not for public consumption. But stuff that happened 30 years ago in my family, I feel like I do have the right to talk about that. And I want to talk about that. So it's very much a process that I talk about. It's 3 years that the book covers. And I change in the book, like I go from being a very uptight, anxious woman to being a woman who is kind of curious about myself and my career. And it's like, well, what can I do with this? Like, this is a big gift that therapy has given me. Is there a way to use this gift, And so I think on my talk today, I've shown how I used it.
Forgive me for asking this follow-up question if you already answered it, but in the process of doing the book, which you say you did quote from the other side,
Mhm.
did you have to did you feel like you were reliving bad feelings, and was it
No, not at all.
no?
No, I feel like the effect was like I can talk about my therapy even more now because I really know it. Like when you do comics, as you know, right? You write it, you do a thumbnail version, you do a tighter thumbnail version, you kind of pencil it, ink it, color it, scan it. Like I really know my stuff now because I've gone through my therapy like so many times. So none of it was re-traumatizing for me at all. The one thing I will say is that there are scenes in there about my grandmother and what she went through in World War II and the family around her. Like she lost her husband and her brother. And when I was drawing those scenes, I would feel so choked up and I would I would like stop and cry. Those pages really, really made me cry. And I think that was the first time I'd ever felt grief going back 2 generations, you know. So that was a surprise to me. But in terms of my personal work, no, it didn't re-traumatize me. It just showed me that, you know, I've really come home to myself, and it feels good to put this on paper. And it feels good to the parts of me to see themselves and see their story. You know, it's kind of a sacred thing in a way for me personally, to see that, you know, those kids, the children, the child parts of me, the children, those child parts of me, and what happened to me in my life, it mattered, right? And therapy was the place where I discovered that all the stuff that had happened to me mattered and it had meaning. And for me, I look at the world around me and I look at other people's kids, and it's like they matter and their stories matter. These kids are going to grow up to be like politicians, and they're going to grow up to be healthcare workers, and they're going to take care of us and decide the law for us, you know, as old people. And so the way we treat them matters. And so I do feel a little bit of a mission in a way to sort of help bring therapy to the public discourse, because I truly believe in it, you know.
Awesome. That would be a great place to end, but we have a couple more questions.
Sure.
Such a great ending point. Alice wonders, and actually a lot of people are riffing on it in the chat, but uh, she wonders, so often, who cares about my story? Why should anybody care? And what do you think? And did that happen to you where you're like, who's going to care about this?
Yeah. There's a chapter in my book called Therapy is for People with Real Problems. And it talks about a part of me that tended to minimize what I'd been through. You know, and this part would say, like, other people had it worse. Look at your mum, look at your stepsister. They went through way worse traumas than you did. Like, that counts. You don't count. And I think it was talking about this with my therapist and doing work around that. Um, I found that this part of me really does minimize my pain. And it's like, yeah, my story may not matter to other people, but it does matter to me. And my therapist said to me, you know, what you've told me, Sacha, counts. It counts as trauma. It counts as neglect. And I hope it's okay for you to hear that. And it was difficult to hear that. You know, it is difficult to sort of see the truth about your childhood. And I think minimizing what we go through is a very common response. It's kind of part of how we cope. It's a coping strategy, right? But then my therapist also said to me, you have a right to your story and you have a right to heal. And so it really kind of brings it home. And even if it only mattered to me, and even if no one read this book, I'm still glad I've made it, you know? So yeah, it's a wonderful thing for me and my parts to see myself reflected in this journey and to see how far I've come. And you know, one of the other things my therapist said to me was that the person who entered therapy, I can kind of bring her with me. That woman who was so anxious and so guarded back in 2017, you know, and had a real sense of like what was not okay for her. She can stay with me on this journey and see what I can do now. And so it's like growth, right? The great growth opportunity.
Oh, it's so great. It's so great. I think I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. So if you've got a last minute question, anybody, please.
Wait, I had one.
Oh, we do. Is it Jason? Who is that?
It's Brandon.
Oh, Brandon, go ahead.
Hey, Brandon.
Hi. Thank you for the talk. My question is, so you say you consider yourself healed and you like recovered from a lot of these wounds before you embarked on this bigger work. So my question is, what kept you motivated to keep working on it after you healed from it? Because, I always am afraid that like if I, quote unquote, get done with processing a lot of my wounds, or that if I heal from my wounds while I'm working on like my bigger project, I'm going to lose the motivation to finish it.
Mhm.
I don't know how founded that fear is because I haven't healed yet, but
Mhm.
um, yeah, I just wonder what kept you going and kept you working on it and kept you focused after you healed from your wounds.
Yeah, so I quit therapy in 2020, but I've continued to sort of do parts work or IFS, right? And it is kind of this tool that you can take outside of therapy with you. So whenever I get kind of like triggered or activated by something I see on the screen or whatever, I can kind of investigate it. And I have found more work to do, personal work to do, not necessarily in therapy, but kind of with myself. And so one of the things I talked about was the Jehovah's Witnesses. And since leaving therapy, I've explored them more and explored like the effect it had on me. And so, I've written this other book about teenage Jehovah's Witnesses, and I've really had to kind of explore a lot of stuff there, and it's included a lot of so there's some religious trauma, not big T trauma, but small T traumas, and also feeling my way towards spirituality, right? Like, what do I actually believe? Because I don't believe what the Jehovah's Witnesses taught me. So there's always more to explore. And I feel like, the childhood trauma stuff is healed and it doesn't affect me like it used to. But I'm still like very interested and curious in life and what motivates me. And, I'm still finding other connections to make. And so I don't know if I have any more memoirs in me, to be honest, but I definitely know I've got more fiction in me. And so I think these tools that therapy has given me, it's given me like a real psychological understanding. And I can give you like a short example of this. So watching political stuff lately, there's been a certain vice presidential candidate who's kind of misogynistic, and he's really kind of activated parts of me. And I've been able to get curious about that. And it's like, okay, well, what parts of him is activating parts of me? And so that is like a continuous work that I'm always going to do, because people are always going to piss me off or annoy me or trigger me, right? And so this is a lifelong tool I have. But when I go into the realm of fiction, I can use these same psychological understandings and bring that to my characters. And that's what I did with this book I've just been working on. It's called Fading, and it's the Jehovah's Witness young adult book. And I've basically used a lot of psychological tools to kind of like really dig into this family, these families, and understand why they joined the Jehovah's Witnesses, what keeps them in, how does their indoctrination affect them, what happens when it all falls apart. I just feel that psychology has given me the means to sort of write better characters. And so, like I said, maybe I won't be a memoirist forever. Maybe I'm done with autobiography, but I'm definitely not done with fiction. And I feel like I'm hopefully a better storyteller from it. So.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Awesome. Thanks, Brandon. Michael, do you want to ask your question? And then we might have one from Bob. I'm not sure.
Could you ask it for me, Tom? You're better at doing me than I am.
I'm just going to read what you wrote. Okay.
Yeah.
How do you assess the importance of using comics, drawing during therapy to process that journey? Did you discover in the drawing anything that wasn't obvious beforehand?
That's a really good question. One of the things I would discover was that I would draw the same things over and over again, and it would be like, oh, that's kind of like meaningful to me. What is this thing that kind of keeps showing up? And I feel that you do kind of tap into the unconscious when you draw. You can kind of tap into kind of pre-verbal parts of you, so like very young parts of me who kind of went through stuff that they maybe couldn't put words to. When I kind of like drew, and I did a lot of big process. I got myself a pack of crayons and a big sheet of, like a big pad of newsprint. And I would do a lot of drawings that weren't therapy comics, but they were just, kind of discovering and exploring inner child feelings and stuff like that. So it was definitely like a form of excavation that, I think saying maybe tapping into pre-verbal parts and the youngest parts of ourselves, it helped me bring a lot of stuff up that was ultimately useful and that I could bring into therapy for sure. I think the process of reading comics, we start to read by reading pictures. And so when we read a comic, two things are happening in our minds. We're putting words and we're sort of seeing the images. And so I think just the way comics operate help uncover levels of meaning that you can't help but tap into when you're drawing them, right?
I love that kind of talk.
Yeah.
I guess we can make this our last question. Bob asks, I have to scroll up and find it. Do you see other people's stories and things that you see in literature in a new way, since you're now writing, quote, from the other side? He says most people write most people write when they're not coming from a place that's resolved. I guess he's asking how you see other stories now.
Yeah, I mean, having healed trauma doesn't mean I'm a completely like healed Buddha person or anything, right? I'm still like fragmented and, like I have my blind spots and all that kind of stuff. But I do feel that psychologically, I kind of connect to people in a more sympathetic way, I would say for sure. So, I mentioned a certain VP candidate who triggers me, but I also read his book and I also see that there's a story of trauma in that he's not talking about. And so when he talks about women, and they should know their place and they should be in the home. I think about his mother, who was not in his home, who was not looking after him. And so I can kind of make connections that may or may not be true, but they're kind of informative to me in the sense that they kind of reconnect me to my compassion. So I'm not dismissing somebody going, I hate that expletive here, right? I'm actually like trying to connect with their humanity in a way, even if they're not very connected to it themselves. Maybe that's the best answer I can give, but I do feel like I'm a more sort of compassionate person in the way that I don't judge people like I used to. For example, I can sort of see what they're carrying, and I can feel a bit more sympathy and softness around that.
Yeah. Creates empathy.
Yeah, sorry, that's the word I was searching for. Empathy. Big
Amazing.
E empathy. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much. I just put the link for Sacha's book in the chat, everybody. So please click it before we sign off, which will be momentarily. Sacha, this was so amazing.
Oh, thank you.
I definitely want to read both the ethnobotany book now
Yeah.
and the Jehovah's
Okay.
Witness teen book.
Excellent. That's excellent news. I'll tell my agent that.
Yeah.
Hopefully she'll agree. So
is the Jehovah's Witness book about the teenagers, is that in process? I mean, is that
so I've thumbnailed the whole thing, and what I'm doing is I'm trying to replace my handwritten scroll with digital text so that I can make a PDF and send it to people that's a bit more readable. I'm hoping to actually bring in another artist for that. So I'm kind of talking to a young artist who would do the final artwork, because it's a book for young people. I feel that maybe I don't need to be the one who draws that. And so if that can go off and be drawn, maybe I can focus on Strange Kind of Love, my botany book. So I have plans. None of them are kind of concrete yet, but I'm hopeful. So
I have a random question. Maybe it's a little glib also, but that'll give everyone a moment to click over to your book and buy it. Prince becoming a Jehovah's Witness for like a year. What was that about? Do you know?
Yeah. You tell me, man. Michael Jackson, funnily enough, was also a Jehovah's Witness for a while. And you know, is it Venus or Serena Williams just got baptized last year? So
Oh, really?
yeah, it's really disappointing. I feel that when I was a Jehovah's Witness, at least I had the benefit of not having the internet, right? So I didn't know any better because I couldn't look it up. But now people can look this religion up and see all the holes in it, and it's like it's kind of dismaying that it still manages to attract people. I know Scientology has really gone down the pans ever since the Leah Remini Going Clear documentary exposed a lot of it. And Jehovah's Witnesses have had a lot of issues, you know, around CSA, which you can look up what that means. And, you know, and a lot of their doctrines don't hold up. But yeah, unfortunately, people really find meaning in it and a surety. You know, I'm talking from a place of not judging. So my mother went through a lot of childhood trauma. And I really do believe that one of the reasons she stays a Jehovah's Witness is there's a lot of certainty in having all the answers and feeling like God is going to make everything okay. So I try not to judge, but it's a very difficult religion for people, you know, and I don't really want people to kind of go into it. So it is a kind of cautionary tale in a way. And one of my aims in making it is that, you know, cult thinking and cults go way beyond just the Jehovah's Witnesses. I mean, you can make an argument that the Mormons, like Scientology, even like Donald Trump and the way certain people around him operate, you can say cult thinking is an action there. And it would be really nice to be able to make young people aware of how cults get in your head and how they operate. There's a model called the BITE model, which stands for behavior, information, thought, and emotion. So cults that will control your behaviors, they'll control how you feel, your emotions, they'll control your information. So as a Jehovah's Witness, you're not allowed to look up other stuff other than them, right? And then BITE, behavior, information, thought, and emotion. And so recognizing how cult thinking gloms onto those things, and that's how they make you compliant. I would really like young people to sort of go out into the world armed with that knowledge. So if I can do that through a young adult book, my little effort.
So wonderful. Oh, wow. I'm going to ask everybody to unmute if you're muted, and just give Sacha a round of applause. Good luck with this great book.
Oh, thank you.
Really,
thank you so much.
Amazing, Sacha. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank
This
you.
is such a lovely group. It's really a real pleasure to be invited back again. So thank you, Tom, for making that happen.
Oh, thank you, Sacha.
Thank you, Sacha. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's hard to leave.
We should do this every Friday. How about that?
Sure.
Bye, y'all. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us. This has been a production of the Sequential Artists Workshop, or SAW. You can find us on social media at Comics Workshop and online at sawcomics.org. You can hear about our many courses at learn.sawcomics.org. SAW is a nonprofit and supported by people like you. Learn how to make a tax-deductible donation at the donate page of sawcomics.org. You can join our free community of comics explorers at members.sawcomics.org. Thanks so much for being here.